Coming up in this episode, we have a drunk who wouldn't take no for an answer. I said in Spanish, "No tocas mi cámara." And but he came again and I just pushed him slightly away. We have Mick Jagger. And I went, "Oh, big deal, you know." And then she said, "But look who's on page 1 and you'll be on page 3. And it had Mick Jagger's autograph. We have dancing girls. We have Volvos. Now, General Colin Powell would be proud of this lineup. We have a haunted house.
En las noches hay pena, fantasmas.
And we have the blessing of Atwakey.
And there we are, both bikes blessed.
So I'm in Cusco, Peru, where I've just bought myself a brand new Chinese motorbike. But the plastic tank air scoops were the wrong colour. So first job was to change the black ones for orange ones. Then I started thinking about making a luggage rack for panniers. All serious long distance motorbike riders have panniers. I got on the internet and I found out the best way to make one is to make a model, like a template model out of plastic tubing. So after buying the tubing and a few connectors, I came up with this design after only about half a day. Then, on the recommendation of one of the owners of the hostel, I wheeled the bike just one block to the workshop of Senor Dimas Roble, who has a workshop that specialises in making supports for pizza delivery bikes. And I was quite happy with the work they did. I got them to add these little 3-inch wide strips of looked like spring steel that they were using. It was very, very hard steel, but only thin. And it ended up being a really good idea because it really did hold up whatever bags I had there, hard pack, soft pack. The idea being to support the bags a bit more than just by ropes. It just gave it a little bit of bottom support on that edge without sticking out too much. The way I designed it, I wanted the centre of gravity to be quite low, a lot lower than most other people put them on. They gave me this rack. They followed my idea quite well. I wanted to be able to just undo the bolts, take it on or off, and when it was on, I didn't want it to interfere with the kickstarter or the passenger foot pegs. They gave it a lovely coat of black paint, and that was one more thing on the bucket list done before I head off. I added a couple of these aftermarket hand protectors, and the bike's coming along quite nicely. Back in the South American Explorers Club, that we had a little Christmas party there for the members with a bit of live music.
Shake it up, baby. Shake it up, baby. No woman, no cry.
The newspaper carried this story that Evo Morales was visiting the very next day because he wanted to spend Christmas at Machu Picchu. So Cristo and I headed over to the Palacio Municipal, kind of like the town hall, and security was tight, but we went in and we were able to listen to his speech. And I also took this handheld gigapan of him with all the other dignitaries. You see here during the Bolivian national anthem, he put his hand on his heart and raised his left fist. He's a bit of a showman, old Evo Morales. During his speech, he recalled how many years ago he used to come as a cocolero, like a coca leaf seller, from La Paz to Cusco, and how the bus trip used to take like hours and days and the road was really bad condition, and never imagined that he would ever come back as a guest of honour as representing the people of Bolivia as its president. Now Evo Morales presents himself politically as leader for the indigenous majority of Bolivia. Now if you know how to read South American politics, he's making a political statement here. You notice he's not wearing a suit. He's wearing indigenous style clothes, like I am today. But he's also, by not attending Mass in the cathedral in La Paz, the capital, coming to Cusco to go to Machu Picchu during Christmas, again, there's a message there, and some Bolivians didn't like it, and I think it actually was a small contributor to his downfall years later. You see, they gave him all these gifts, and then he said, "I must go because I'm having a meeting with the president of Peru, Humala." So Cristo and I, we just walked a couple of blocks down to Coricancha, which today is a church, but before was the main Inca temple, and you can still see remnants of it in there. And it was the temple where the Spaniards got most of the gold that they looted from the Incas. There's Humala and there's Evo Morales coming in. The next day they came out and they issued a joint communique called the Declaration of Cusco, where they talked about establishing a joint quinoa foundation, reducing the pollution going into Lake Titicaca, which both countries share, and agreed to promote chewing coca leaves as a legitimate cultural practice. After being in Cusco for so long, you soon find out that Evo Morales was quite popular because Cusco, the region generally, is left-leaning. But the very next day in the local newspaper, the main story wasn't about Evo Morales. It was something much more tragic. It was about two little boys, aged 10 and 11, who were killed. They were playing with a live hand grenade. Nobody knows how they got their hands on it, and it exploded and they died. The article said they came from a familia humilde, which means a very humble family, a poor family. And I couldn't stop thinking how sad it must be, with so close to Christmas, to lose two boys like that. This is Robert Joy. Now, he'd been in the hostel for a couple of months, waiting for a parcel of bike parts to arrive. Finally, it arrived just before Christmas, and he was not wasting any more time. He was going to head down to the Amazon.
How long have you been on the road there?
Just over 10 months.
And where are you heading now?
I'm going off to try and cycle across the Trans-Amazonica.
In the middle of the jungle?
In the middle of a jungle.
And how long do you think that'll take?
I think just over 3 months, I'm hoping. So maybe a bit quicker. But I'll have to see how muddy it is.
Now, the Trans-Amazonica is around about 4,000 kilometres, and the western half of it is unpaved and is notoriously muddy. But Rob was yet another example of the many two-wheeled adventurers that come and go from La Estrelita. Now, you can see here Rob's just wearing a t-shirt and shorts. I know you work up a sweat when you're pedalling hard, and he's probably got a jumper in his bag, but he's going to experience some really chilly days because he has to go up over 4,720 metres before dipping down into the steaming tropical Amazon jungle. I did hear a little bit from him later on before we lost contact that he did make it to the Amazon. Meanwhile, in the Plaza de Armas, despite the seasonal Christmas rain, Christmas festivities were manifesting. You can see all these vendors under tents selling stuff to tourists. Those little grey blocks are a kind of homemade incense made from mashed up newspapers. That dark green stuff there is Yareta. It's a very slow growing woody plant that only grows on the Altiplano. It's so tough it resists and breaks the teeth of llamas that try to eat it. That's how it survives. And it's almost extinct in the Andes because of people digging it up because it makes excellent slow burning firewood. I don't know what that moss stuff is. But I have seen it used in these nativity dioramas. This passageway is just near my hostel, and that's the German and Austrian consulate there. You see the Santa and his helper statues there? They put it up every year. A couple of nights later, I went to that street corner to take a panorama of the German consul and those little Santa statues. And while I set up my Gigapan machine, which is quite expensive with the camera and everything, there's a few $1,000s there. A drunk came up and started saying things about, "You got to pay me $1 for a photo," and he lunged towards my machine. And I pushed him once, and he came back again, and I just pushed him slightly. I was just defending my apparatus. Now I could see a problem looming. The camera was in the middle of a sequence of several dozen photographs, and if you stop it and start again, there's not enough battery. So I wasn't going to pack up and wait for him to go away and come back. I said in Spanish, "No tocas mi cámara." And but he came again, and I just pushed him slightly away. But he was so drunk and so unsteady on his feet, he just went flat on his back. When he got up, he sort of seemed a bit disoriented, didn't know where he was. And he saw two female tourists walking up the other end of the street, so he ran after them, trying to get money off them. On Christmas morning, my friend Jane invited me and a few others to the Hotel Monasterio. This was first an Inca building, then it was a monastery, then it was a university, and now it's a hotel. We had a buffet breakfast, and then we went into this room, which looks like it's unchanged since the days when it was a monastery. But it's actually just for the tourists to look at. It looks like a museum, doesn't it?
That's why. A train set would be good. Yeah, it'd be great. Just us for one. I'm frozen.
In the afternoon, we went to Jane's house, and that lady there, her name's Dot, or later she changed her name to Emily. She was a stage and screen actress in the UK, and she made this beautiful rum Christmas cake. She told me once when she was younger in Spain, over a summer she made these cakes and they sold and sold, and she sold so many she couldn't keep up with demand, and at the end of the summer she had enough money to buy a car. She appeared on stage and in British TV shows like Minder. Dot also wrote a book about how she cured herself of cancer. A few years previously, she'd been given just a few months to live if she didn't undergo radical surgery and chemotherapy, but she cured herself using natural therapies, and here she is looking full of zest and vitality.
I was diagnosed in January 2007 with stage 2 to 3 breast cancer. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't even know what an oncologist was until I saw one on Desperate Housewives. I managed to go to Argentina to a wonderful healing center, and then to the Peruvian jungle to take the healing plants of the indigenous Indians. And then I lived in Cusco and took more healing plants, changed my diet, drank my own urine, and so many other things.
Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way.
So now it's New Year's Eve in the Plaza de Armas. There's always lots of rain, but there's also always lots of fireworks. You can see there's big ones set off from the hills that are paid for by the local municipality, but there's also lots of little fireworks and penny bungers let off by drunken revelers, and there's always a lot of accidents and injuries. And when I talking to people the next day, there were a lot of pickpocket events as well. It happens everywhere around the world on New Year's Eve, and Cusco is no different to any other place. So this is the 1st of January 2012, and there was a Volvo transcontinental rally all lined up in the main plaza. Now, General Colin Powell would be proud of this lineup. Look at all these Volvos, old and new. I like the old ones best. You can see here on this map, they'd started in Buenos Aires, gone down to Patagonia and come up the Pacific coast. And you can see on the door, it has been or is planning to go right across Eurasia. It looks like Cartagena in the Caribbean is the destination for this rally. Now, over the next few days there were many processions and street parades in the front of my hostel. The street is called Calle Tuyamayo, which means River of Bones in Quechua. I'll tell you in a later episode why it's called that. There was live music. There was dancing girls. There were statues of saints that looked like they could topple over at any minute. there was fireworks. And there was even King Kong. Meanwhile, back in the main plaza, I came upon this. Some workmen lifting up these recently restored religious statues. There you can see the devil and the Archangel Michael. The other one is of Santiago, or St. James in English, who is the patron saint of Spain and therefore was the patron saint of the conquistadors. You can see here it's called Templo del Triunfo, which means the Temple of the Triumph. But it's not the triumph of the Archangel Michael over the Diablo that gives it its name. If you read this very eroded inscription, because this is actually the third church that has been in this spot. It's the oldest church in Cusco, but before that it was an Inca temple. And it mentions that the Apostle Santiago was seen on his white horse and guided the conquistadors to a victory over the idolatrous barbarians. Now this spot marks quite a turning point in Peruvian history because there were only 190 Spaniards and a few thousand enemies of the Incas helping them against an Inca army that historians estimate between 40,000 and 200,000 Inca warriors. They besieged Cusco for 10 months. So less than 200 conquistadors spent 10 months holed up inside the building that stood here before they built the church on top of it. Until one day they said they saw the Apostle Santiago in the clouds to protect them. They rode into battle and against overwhelming odds defeated the huge Inca army. But they did have the advantage of armour, cavalry, a few primitive firearms and a few thousand enemies of the Inca. Now if you look at the statue there, his sword is like a flaming sword because the Spanish were very smart and they put paintings and statues of Santiago and they made him look a little bit like the Inca god Illapa, the god of thunder. And apparently within a generation of the Spanish conquest, inside this church there was a huge painting of the Apostle Santiago with his flaming sword standing over all the Inca warriors as a kind of religious propaganda that you won't beat the Apostle Santiago, he's more powerful than you. Now you can read that any way you want. But on the next church adjacent, there's a plaque commemorating the execution of an independence martyr, Tupac Amaru, whose wife and child was executed in that same plaza. And just across there in the main park, on that big brass plaque, they commemorate the thousands upon thousands of Andean native people who died in the various wars of resistance against the Spanish. So just by reading these three different inscriptions and plaques, all within 100 meters of each other in the main plaza of Cusco, you get three different interpretations and you get an idea of how over several centuries history has written and been rewritten, originally with a lot of exaggeration and miracles and so forth, to sort of something that's a bit more down to earth and truthful. This is Matt Burney and his 2003 DR200 Suzuki, which he'd only bought a few weeks before secondhand in Colombia, ridden it down and was heading down to Patagonia. He needed a new rear shock absorber and he couldn't find one in Huaynacapac Street. So he bought a Chinese one and modified it to fit, which made me think, you know, Japanese bikes, parts are not that easy to get as people say. Not in places like Cusco anyway. Before he got to Colombia, he rode a bicycle that he built himself from raw metal. He was a mechanical engineer who gave it up, he said, because he liked to work with his hands. And he once rode a unicycle from coast to coast across the USA. An interesting guy. He also made me feel a little bit better, but at his expense, when he told me he came off his bike in the cobblestones in Avenida de la Raza like I did. Matt spoke excellent Spanish, and when we went to Cusco's biker bar, Norton Rat's Tavern, he was a hit with this little barmaid here who pulled out the leather-bound visitor's book, which in my opinion is a valuable historical document that might be worth something one day because it's full of little stories, anecdotes, maps, diagrams, business cards of all the people that have come through Cusco on two wheels. These two BMW 650s were ridden from Canada by Jordan and Sandra. They said they were having a great time, except in Lago Atitlan in Guatemala, where bandits with guns and machetes held them up. But they didn't get everything they wanted. After cutting the bags that they wanted with the machete, they started beeping their horns and scared them off. A bit brave, a bit foolish maybe, but it worked. You see all the bikers riding up this wooden ramp. I was to find out later, that is probably the hardest bit of riding you're going to do in a 10,000 mile trip, because you have to time it so you don't hit a pedestrian, you don't get sideswiped by vehicles going down the street, and you've got to go quick enough that you don't fall off. You know, you can't put your feet down when you're halfway up the ramp. But you know, Central America doesn't have a monopoly on crime against two-wheel travellers. This is Paulius from Lithuania. He trekked to Machu Picchu and they wouldn't let him in because he didn't have a copy of his passport with him. He offered to pay the top price ticket, but they still wouldn't let him in. So he trekked all the way back in the rainy season, got his passport, trekked back and saw Machu Picchu. He wasn't going to leave without seeing it. But he told me this rather sad story. He said when he was cycling near Mendoza in Argentina, a jeep followed him slowly for a few miles, pulled out in front of him, pulled a gun on him and stole his brand new Nikon DSLR. He didn't report it to the police, he just kept cycling. Here he is in Cusco about to leave for Lima. Now Cusco has a substantial police presence and most tourists have no problems and feel quite safe, like I did when I was there. But if you read the local news, there are some terrible things happening in certain parts of Peru. The newspapers carried this report that just 200 kilometers northwest of Cusco, in an area called the VRAE, V-R-A-E, there was a full-scale military operation underway to finally liquidate what they called narco-terroristas. Then, in January 2012, terrible news in all the newspapers.
Conmocionó nuestro país. 3 policías, una joven de 18 años que estaba embarazada y un niño de solo 14 años fueron asesinados salvajemente dentro de una comisaría en el distrito de Santa Rosa, en Jaén.
The criminals attacked this tiny rural police station at 10:30 on a Sunday night. But within weeks, the Peruvian police were able to arrest the gang, who called themselves Los Sanguinarios de Bagua, which means the bloodthirsty ones from Bagua. Now this is the ringleader called Borrego, which means the sheep. And even though he was arrested within a few weeks of that terrible crime, he continued his crime from inside his cell, ordering a fatal hit on the governor of Amazonas state in Peru, and it was carried out by his 16-year-old nephew. He didn't admit to it till years later. Death threats by telephone and extortions are a terrible problem in Peru, and according to this, 95% of them are made by criminals inside the jail. But Santa Rosa and Jaén are over 1,000 kilometers north of Cusco. Where I was in Cusco, I felt safe. Those kind of crimes rarely affect tourists. What affected me though was this 50 sol note. They both had the metallic threads, but an alert shopkeeper noticed that it didn't have the watermark when he put it under the ultraviolet light. So I stuck with it. I lost about $20 maybe. Sitting in a cafe one day, I saw this come on the TV.
Ya se encuentra en el Cusco el segundo cargamento de piezas devueltas por la Universidad de Yale.
Más de 170 osamentas encontradas en el santuario incaico de Machu Picchu llegaron al Cusco en un vuelo de la Fuerza Aérea. 26 cajas serán trasladadas mañana al Museo de la Casa Concha, en el centro histórico de la ciudad.
Now that museum was only a block and a half from my hostel. I said to Cristo, let's go and check it out. It was opened due to a specific clause in the agreement Yale made with the Peruvian government regarding the return of the artefacts. They had to be put on display and not sort of forgotten somewhere. It was in this old historic building. You can see the Yale flag there flapping away. Now it had only been open a couple of weeks. The sign here says Cusco residents have free entry. So I go in, you can see here I've got a very low ticket number, 599. And the lady said, oh, by the way, both of you have to pay 20 soles, which is about $7 American. And Cristo said, but I'm Peruvian. And she goes, oh, well, you get in for free because your ancestors were Incas. And then Cristo started trying to get me in for free, which I didn't really want. And the lady said, but wait a minute. When you pay a ticket, you get to sign the visitor's book. And I went, oh, big deal, you know. And then she said, but look who's on page 1 and you'll be on page 3. and it had Mick Jagger's autograph. It said something like, thanks for a very interesting visit, Mick Jagger. Now, I'd completely forgotten, but just a few weeks before, Mick Jagger had been in Cusco for a couple of days. He got absolutely mobbed by fans. He was staying up in San Blas. He was only here for 2 or 3 days before he went down to Machu Picchu and then to the jungle and then disappeared in his private jet. So we both signed the visitor's book and we went into this brand new museum created specially to receive artifacts collected by Hiram Bingham on behalf of Yale University nearly 100 years before. There is a lot that we don't know about the Incas because they didn't have a system of writing to record their history. A lot of what we know is based on what the Spanish wrote, and it is a little bit biased towards their own version of history. Now, having said that, this is an Inca tunic called an umcu, worn by the Inca men, and if you look across the waist there, you can see finely embroidered designs, and some people say that's a form of hieroglyphic writing, and there is some evidence for that, but it has yet to be deciphered. Likewise, this is a kipu, a series of knotted strings, colour-coded, and it is known that they were used to send messages and tally up numbers and things like that. The people that knew how to read them were called kipu kumayoks, and that is actually the Quechua word for accountant. These quipus actually predate the Inca culture by centuries, but still today they are yet to be fully deciphered. But saying that the Andean people never developed their own native writing system could be incorrect, because in 1875 a French-Austrian explorer called Charles Wyner documented this hieroglyphic script, which he described as being written on Dutch paper in red and blue ink, and they were found at Paucartambo, which is only about 100 kilometres northeast of Cusco. Now, the museum is in the Casa Concha, which means shell house, and it's a Spanish colonial building built on top of an old Inca palace, and we know that by looking at these niches in the wall. That niche, that cavity in the wall, was where they would put a royal mummy of one of the Inca kings or queens. They kept them sort of preserved, and they honoured and revered the deceased previous Inca kings and queens. And in Inca times, they used to parade them around the main plaza on special occasions. There wasn't much silver or gold on display when I was there anyway, except for this little figurine made of silver. This was interesting. These are what they call bolas or boleadoras. They were a hunting device used all across the Americas. Stones connected by cords, and the hunter would sort of swing it around his head, fling it at the fleeing animal's legs, and it would get entangled and it would bring the animal down, and then they would catch the animal. But they also used it in war against humans. Now, if you look at the one at the back, it looks metallic, and the display said it was made from meteoric iron. And that actually disproves the commonly heard statement that the Incas did not have iron. You can see that's actually been somehow sort of carved and made into the correct shape, like a boleador stone with a groove in the centre for the cord to be tied onto. Now, there is a lot of arguments about who was the first outsider to see Machu Picchu. It definitely wasn't Hiram Bingham, the guy from Yale. Machu Picchu appeared in maps and other publications long before Hiram Bingham ever came to Peru. Like this book here claiming that a Peruvian called Lizarraga was the great discoverer. But there were people there even before him, and I'll talk about that in a later episode when I actually go to Machu Picchu. It wasn't until much later, when I was looking at that photo of the visitor's book, I noticed it said thank you under Mick Jagger's signature. And I thought, who wrote that? And a bit of research led me to believe it's Lorenz Scott, who was Mick Jagger's 6'3" brunette girlfriend, long-term girlfriend at the time. And you can actually see her in some of this crazy footage of when he arrived at the airport and going into the limousine. And it's actually very sad to know that, because only 2 years later, she committed suicide by hanging herself. I chose an orange bike not because it looks like a KTM, but because it increases the visibility, and there are many studies around the world that high visibility increases the safety of riding a motorbike, and many bikers have been knocked down and the driver just didn't see them if they're wearing black or grey or whatever colours like that. But high visibility isn't the only reason I like orange. My mother was born in Holland, and that's the national colours of the Netherlands. My father was born in an Australian town called Orange, and that's where he met my mother. So when it came time to give the bike a name, I was thinking something orange. So I got on the internet and looked up native Australian names for orange. And in the Alyawa language, there is a word for native Australian orange called Atwakey or Atwakey. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but there it is. I also wanted a name for the whole project, my webpage, etc. So I translated my surname short and I found it in the Wagiman indigenous language, and it's Madaru. So I came up with this idea, Madaru Moto.
Madaru and Atwakey are stupid names.
Now all self-respecting long-distance motorbike riders print their own stickers to give out, to start conversations, to stick on the fridge, whatever. In my street, Tuyamayo, there are a lot of printing shops, but the one I was talking to, when I went back there, it had closed. They had the dreaded red posters, Infracción Tributaria. They got done something naughty with not keeping their tax records up to date, so they closed them down for a few days. Some of the business owners I know in Cusco call that the sign of the tax Nazis, but you see them all around South America. And then one night walking home in a little Inca lane called Cañaracay near my hostel, I saw this place was open, and I always think if people that work late, they're hard workers. So I went in there and paid them, and they printed me a box of a few thousand stickers. Now I'm no graphic artist, as you can see, but keeping in the black and orange theme, I gave it kind of like a two-wheel look. The circle on the left is a colour photo of me and the bike, and the one on the right is actually fashioned after a pre-Columbian gold disc that I saw in a book. It's, I think it's in a museum in Bogota actually. And I also incorporated a couple of cryptic clues in there, but I'll talk about them later on. Jeff, the owner of Norton Rat's Biker Bar, liked it enough to stick a few around his bar. But the first member of the public I gave them to was this little boy who promptly ripped it in half. He didn't understand and he didn't care, just like this little boy playing in all this dirt and mud and stuff, blissfully unaware of the irony that's written on the wall behind him. My documentary about Aussies in the Andes was screened a second time due to popular demand. It even came out in the local version of Time Out magazine. This time it was screened at the Real McCoy, a British-style pub owned by an American woman, where we quite often won a bottle of wine for winning the quiz. But that's not the main reason I used to go there. I used to go there because they had this really good meat pie with mashed potato and gravy. A bit different from the Peruvian pork and fried potatoes that is very popular here. Speaking of cholesterol, this is an alpaca meat roll with quinoa. Alpaca meat is very low in cholesterol. And quinoa, they say, is a super grain with the most complete protein, low glycemic index, and gluten-free. Now, I ate this super healthy Inca food at this restaurant in the company of these three British fellows. But you see the Australian flag in the background. That's because an Australian guy owned this, married to a Peruvian. He called it Two Nations, with a kangaroo and alpaca logo. Now, of course, he wasn't the only Australian in Cusco who owned a restaurant. There's my friend Jane, who had Jack's Cafe, and I often had coffee there with my friend Paulo Greer, an expert on Machu Picchu and the history of mining in Peru. And he's always full of amazing anecdotes and historical facts. On this particular day, he told me his great uncle used to go fishing with Harry S. Truman. The other place I liked a lot was Paddy's Irish Pub, right on the plaza there. It claimed to be the world's highest 100% Irish-owned pub on planet Earth. A lot of caveats there, but I think it's true. And not for the food, although they did have a great shepherd's pie. The guys on the extreme left and right, local intellectuals, very interesting fellows, more about them in a later episode. I generally don't drink alcohol unless it's a special occasion. I stopped drinking when I was 30. I couldn't handle the hangovers and all the wasted money and stupid things. So I never joined the Cusco pub crawl crowd. I'll leave that to the Facebook generation. Speaking of Facebook, look what came out in the newspaper in Peru. Australian Day in Paddy's Irish Pub in Cusco, which means it's almost my 50th birthday, which I celebrated in style in La Estrelita's kitchen.
Happy birthday to me!
Adelina told me I'd have my number plates within 15 days, but 6 weeks later I'm still waiting for my number plates. Apparently the number plate factory has a big Christmas vacation. Now I'm very aware that I don't have experience riding on the other side of the road as they do here in most of South America. So I decided to hire another Honda Tornado and go with Angelo and just get some traffic experience because I was a little bit confused, especially coming to intersections and turning left, right which way to give way. He suggested we just drive straight down Highway 35. There were a lot of attractions along there. And I also wanted to try out my new action cam, a Drift 170. The battery gave in the night before though, and luckily I had a spare battery, the big fat one. But when I got home and I realised the lens you could rotate 90 degrees, and I had it rotated the wrong way, so they're all like look, up and down, as you can see. Also, you can see when it's filmed vertically, the jello effect is much worse due to the rolling shutter and the vibrations of the bike. So what I've done is I've rotated it, I've cropped it, I've run it through a program that's supposed to take the jello out, and it's kind of watchable. That's all I've got to show you. So filling up with gas, I pick up the tab as usual, and we're off. Into the main plaza of Cusco, which was twice as big in the time of the Incas. And you see that church there? That is now a Jesuit church. Originally it was Huayna Capac's palace. He was the father of the two Inca brothers who were at war at the time the Spanish arrived. It was called Amaru Cancha, which means enclosure of the serpent. And the early chronicles say inside there was a live giant snake that someone had brought up from the Amazon, and statues of snakes. Then when Pizarro conquered Cusco, he rewarded his top lieutenants with palaces and properties around the main plaza, and he gave that property to Hernando de Soto, the same Hernando de Soto who later went and explored like the Mississippi and North America. The building on the right was Huascar's palace. Depending on whether you're Peruvian or Ecuadorian, he was the legitimate Inca ruler at the time of the Spanish conquest. Now this winding street, it's a beautiful street. Pity it's a bit of a rainy day, but it's narrow, it's very rustic. It's called Recoleta. Although it is quite hairy walking along here, especially with a big backpack if there's traffic, because look how narrow the footpath is. Then it opens up, as you can see here, to the sort of not so colonial part. That high fence on the right, behind there is the Cusqueña Brewery, said to be the oldest continuously operating brewery in all of South America. Now you see this pile of dirt here. Around Cusco it's generally a reddy, orangey kind of soil, and you see it everywhere. You know, it's rainy season, not the best time to go for a joyride, but on we go. And rain, of course, makes the potholes bigger like they do everywhere in the world. The vast majority of Cusco looks like this. Modern and nondescript, but it's expanding rapidly to the east. You see there, that sign says cancha. That's a Quechua word that's entered Spanish, and it means an enclosed area. So you often see cancha de football, which means football field. Now this is what I wanted, traffic experience. We've got to cross 2 lanes of traffic and turn left at the same time. But just show a bit of patience, it all works out. Now this tall tower immediately reminded me of the tall American Eagle monument in Canberra, but this is actually a condor. And how it has withstood all the earthquakes that frequently rock this area and lightning strikes and everything, I don't know, but it is a very imposing structure. Now you see on the left hand side there that coloured sign. That's a map of the old Inca Empire, which was divided into four. The name of the empire was Tiwantisuyu, which actually means the land of four parts. And out of the main plaza of Cusco, there were four roads correspond with the cardinal points. And we're actually travelling on the southern branch, known as the Collasuyo, the land to the south. These roads go all up and down the Andes. It is known that those tracks existed a long time before the Incas, but the Incas improved them and maintained them and made them bigger and wider. And this one here continues all the way down to Chile, goes south of Santiago, the capital, and is over 3,000 kilometres in length. There's one that goes to the north, up to the border with Colombia. It also is more than 3,000 kilometres in length. It's an amazing achievement. But, of course, it led to the downfall of the Incas because the Spanish and their cavalry loved those roads and could just follow them to all the major cities and loot them and pillage. I soon learned to pay attention to Angelo's hand signals. See, he's there saying slow down, because we were about to cross a railway track. I soon learned it doesn't pay to hog the middle lane. It's best to keep an eye on your rear vision mirror and stick to the right. Despite the drizzly weather, I was really enjoying this ride. And you have to remember, it's the first ride since I had my motorbike accident that left me on crutches for 2 weeks, and only the third time I've been on a motorbike in 30 years. So we're coming into the town of Oropesa, and you see on the right hand side there it says Keiko. That's a reminder that just the year previously, Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of the jailed president Alberto Fujimori, had run against Ollanta Humala and lost by a razor-thin margin. And it's interesting to note, one of Keiko's chief advisors in that election was a lawyer from New York called Rudy Giuliani. You can see here ladies holding up plastic bags with bread in it, because Oropesa is renowned as where they make these huge circular loaves of bread that are famous all in the Cusco area. It looked like it was going to rain, so we pulled over here to have a coffee and a cake. But then the sun came out and we continued to the ruins of Kañaracay. Now these ruins were built by the Wari culture, who preceded the Incas, and they lasted a lot longer than the Incas. You can see here they definitely influenced the Inca architecture because they've got those trapezoid cavities in the wall, those niches, which they call hornacinas in Spanish. They might seem like a fairly inconsequential architectural feature, those nichos, but they played a very important role in the Wari and the Incas who followed them, because they used to place the Inca kings, their mummified remains, in there, worship them, care for them, bring them out and parade them on certain occasions. And it even played a role in the downfall of the Inca Empire in the face of the conquistadors, because the two brothers entered into something called the War of the Mummies. And believe it or not, even today in modern Peru, some people still revere Inca mummies and believe that they have some sort of supernatural power.
People take mummies because they could sell them on the black market, but some people are still very superstitious and they take them home and they think that they can bring them good luck. Some people still consult mummies like the ancient Incas used to. Unfortunately, they rot away. After 5-10 years, they just turn to dust, eaten by mould and insects and whatever.
Now, this imposing structure is called Portada de Rumilkolka, which means portal to the stone storehouse, because around here there were quarries where the Incas and the people before quarried their rock. What makes this very interesting is it's a mixture of Wari and Inca stone, and they know that there was an earthquake here in 950 AD that destroyed the nearby city of Piquilacta, the Wari city, and then the Incas who came later started following with earthquake-proof stone masonry. I'll talk about that later, but you can see here there's a mixture of styles, and look at that on the wall. You see those stones sticking out? They were kind of like a stepping stone, so you could get on top of this structure. And on top of the structure, there is actually an aqueduct of water. Now, the full purpose of this gateway-like structure is not fully understood, but obviously it's on the main Inca road, and it was some sort of toll station, control station. And the fact that it still stands despite this being a highly active earthquake zone, it's a testimony to the skill of the original builders. Or is it? When we were there, we didn't see any signs that indicated that these ruins were rebuilt and restored in the 20th century. Next stop was this lookout overlooking a quaint cemetery. a beautiful white church, and Lake Urcos. Lake Urcos lives on in Inca mythology because it is supposedly where a huge golden chain was hidden from the Spanish on the eve of them riding in to take Cusco. 3 separate Spanish chronicles relate that when Huascar was born, the son of Huayna Capac, he celebrated by having a huge rope or chain made of gold that was so heavy it took 200 men to lift it. Now, the Prince Huascar, his name ends with a R, Huascar, but the Quechua word for rope is Huasca. In fact, you've all heard of ayahuasca, which means spirit rope, because the vines look like a rope. So probably it wasn't a chain. The Incas generally didn't use chains until the Spanish came, but maybe it was a rope decorated with gold tinsel or trinkets, still of huge value. Already both the princes, Huascar and Atahualpa, were dead, so the Cusco people, and Cusco was the capital of the Inca Empire, hid all the gold. In fact, within a few weeks of taking Cusco, the Spanish were searching nearby lakes looking for more gold. But the golden chain or rope of Huascar has never been found. In the town of Urcos, there's this statue of a ukuku, which is kind of a mixture of Christian and Inca mythology beliefs. Supposedly, ukukus are a hybrid between a bear and a human. These weirdly shaped rocks are probably actually Inca huacas, which are sacred stones worshipped by the ancient people. In the town of Andahuaylillas, we saw this rather curious painting of an old-fashioned aeroplane on a balcony facing the main plaza. As I was taking this photo, a lady tapped me on the shoulder and said she was the owner and demanded payment. I can't remember the amount, but it was something like $20 for taking the photo. And she didn't seem to believe when I said I don't have $20 on me because I spent it on lunch and gasoline. And then she went off in a huff, and I don't think she believed me when I said I didn't have the money. But I don't believe that she was the owner of the house either. Then halfway back home, we came to the highlight of the day, the Hacienda Angostura. The history of this particular building is remarkable. The Hacienda Angostura is built upon an old Inca platform. Now, the ancient Royal Inca highway called the Capacñan passed this way. And here at Angostura, the chronicles are quite clear. There was a huaca, or sacred site to the Incas, dedicated to the wind, called Huayra, which translates as the place where the wind enters. Now, if you look from above, you can see it's situated between these 2 mountain bluffs. Obviously, it's a place where the wind enters. Also, the river passes down there, the sacred river Huatane, which originates in Cusco. It's also mentioned in several chronicles that this was part of the Cusco Seque system, a series of trails that radiated out from Cusco in all different directions, and these trails led to huacas, or sacred sites, like this one dedicated to the wind. And the chronicles are also quite clear that at this particular one, Huayra, children were sacrificed in a gruesome ceremony called Capacocha. But its interesting history continues after the Incas. The earliest records indicate that this property was owned by Francisco Aldorate Maldonado. Now, the first Maldonado came to Cusco with Pizarro when they besieged Cusco. When Pizarro looted the city, he handed out the top properties around the Plaza de Armas, all former Inca palaces, to his top lieutenants. And one of them was called Diego de Maldonado. And he was given the palace of Inca Yupanqui, and that's where Paddy's Irish Pub stands today, upon the foundations of that building. And by the way, its neighbour, which is Norton Rat's Tavern Biker Bar, was the Palace of Huascar. In the 1930s, this was a huge hacienda that employed 30 families, and they grew mainly maize. Then in the 1960s, a huge political upheaval brought in agrarian reform policies, where the huge landowners lost their land and it was sort of parted out to agricultural workers in the form of agricultural co-ops. But this particular property fell into disrepair, disuse, and now it's totally abandoned, except on Halloween.
Acá estamos en la casa de brujas, acá cada octubre, 31 de octubre. Los cusqueños se reúnen y vienen acá a pasar la noche. En ese campo de allá más o menos acampan, se suben al cerro. Según dice que está un poco embrujado esto, que en las noches hay penas, fantasmas.
¿Fantasmas?
Sí, según la gente, ¿no? que de acá del lugar.
¿Cree usted en fantasmas?
No, no creo. No.
Pero algunos sí.
Algunos sí. La casa es abandonada, no vive nadie. Él es el único dueño,
Yo.
Él es el dueño.
I couldn't help but think that maybe this place is abandoned for a very good reason, when you consider that it was a sacred site to the Incas where they used to sacrifice children, and that a descendant of the conquistadors built a huge hacienda here. And people claim that there's ghosts and supernatural things on Halloween. Maybe it does represent a curse or revenge of the Incas.
Hey, let's get out of here!
So here we are coming back into the built-up part of Cusco. One thing you notice is there's still a lot of Volkswagen bugs on the road in Peru and South America generally. There were assembly plants in Brazil and Venezuela, though apparently Peru was supplied mainly from a factory in Mexico. So there's not much traffic because it's a Sunday afternoon. Perfect time to sort of learn a bit of traffic sense. Although I soon realised on a bike it's best to just give way to everybody and ride defensively. You can see there it says Pumamarca, which means place of the puma. That's because seen from above, the streets of Cusco form the outline of a puma. And puma iconography is everywhere in Cusco. By the way, you hear that squeaky noise? It's not a bird and it's not my brakes. It's a song by Mary Jane called Triple M, and it's a monkey that she's incorporated into it. So we're back under the giant condor. To me that looks kind of like a miniature Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now this section of Highway 35, which was also previously an Inca royal road, it was the same road that Simon Bolivar took when he did a tour of Peru and came to Cusco shortly after winning independence for Peru in 1825. Records say he came via this plaza here called Limac Pampa before being feted and welcomed by all the dignitaries in the heart of Cusco. And while he was in Cusco, one of his top lieutenants made a very popular proclamation abolishing the mita system, which was a kind of forced labour dating back to the Incas. In a way it was kind of slavery, and he also handed back title to the land to these poor agricultural workers. In some ways a precursor to the agrarian reform that happened later in the 1960s and 70s. So finally back in Avenida Tuyamayo and home sweet home, Hostal La Estrelita. Now Dan Jones kindly gifted me this plastic top box, which was a great fit for my bike, and I planned on putting my Gigapan apparatus in there inside a aluminium padded box. But it had a crack in the lid and I wanted to waterproof it. So I came up with this idea to make my own waterproof bags out of plastic and gaffer tape. I didn't really know what I was doing, I just went with the flow and this was the result. Also made some bigger ones for my backpacks because it's the rainy season and if I don't do something, they're definitely going to get wet. Also, I wanted to put a little rack on the front, and the Ronco dealership said they could supply one, but when I went there, they had fallen victim to the red tax Nazis as well. However, in true Peruvian fashion, life goes on in an improvised manner on the street. Here he is cutting and adapting it to make it fit. And a little bit of impromptu welding and voila. Finally, my number plates were ready to be collected, and I went to pick them up in the suburb of Santa Beatriz. As you enter that particular suburb, look what the banner says. Meanwhile, I was burning up with impatience, if you'll pardon the pun, in anticipation of being finally able to ride my brand new motorbike. Now I had everything, including compulsory insurance. I was especially careful mounting the number plate because I would soon be out of Peru and getting a replacement would be next to impossible. Also, I'd heard in some of the big cities people thieve foreign number plates as a trophy to put above their bar. So spring washers and double lock nuts and a bit of Loctite as tight as I could get it, and there she is, ready to go. Angelo offered to come over and check over the bike before we did a trial run, and he found a lot of small faults. A lot of the bolts weren't torqued up properly, weren't tightened up enough. The gearbox only had about half the amount of oil it should have had. The main thing we found was the solenoid cables weren't tightened up at all, they were just finger loose. And we also found the fuel in the carburetor bowl was all dirty.
¿Qué es?
Esta es la suciedad del carburador, a pesar que la moto es nueva, es sucio. ¿Sí?
Sí.
Es necesario esas limpiezas. Okay.
So he recommended we take out the silkscreen fuel filter that's in the tank and replace it with an inline cartridge type. That red cable on the front there, that was for a planned auxiliary battery that I was going to mount on a box on that rack. You can see here some chrome leg guards. In Spanish they call them mataperros, which means dog killers. I figured if I'd had them on the Tornado when I had the crash, I wouldn't have twisted my hip. But some people say they actually are more dangerous in an accident because they can trap your leg against the hot cylinder. But I went ahead and fitted it anyway because I've also seen people can mount things on there. It's like an extra rack. Angelo gave me a quick rundown on how to disassemble and clean a carburetor, and that information came in handy many years later. But they are pure simplicity, especially compared to a more modern electronic fuel injection unit with an electric fuel pump and all that jazz. In fact, only a handful of times I had carburetor problem, and it was due to the altitude, which is not the carburetor's fault. I had to change the jets. And Angelo greased every nut and bolt that we could access. And finally we changed the Chinese spark plug for one off a Honda, and I kept the old one as a spare, of course. Hopefully my bike is now prepped properly and ready to roll, but I still needed more left-hand drive traffic experience. I wanted to get the hang of the bike. So a few days later, with Angelo as my guide, Atwakey made her maiden voyage. A roughly triangular route around several local attractions that totaled over 100 kilometres. But on the big day, the lady wasn't for starting. She would start, but she wouldn't idle. And I was reluctant to rev it too much because it was a brand new engine. But Angelo took control, he was a mechanic, he said rev it, warm it up. Even after it was warmed up, as soon as I gave it some throttle, it would conk out. Eventually, after 13 tries, and by keeping the revs up, we got it going. Angelo, can you move your bike? I'm not sure whether I'm going to overshoot this ramp. And then it got up the top of the ramp, and then it conked out again. And finally, Angelo pulled it across the line. It sort of crossed my mind that Angelo pulling the bike out of the doorway was a bit like a midwife delivering a baby out of the womb. And there we were. We're out in the traffic. This time I set my camera upside down rather than sideways. See, the date there is upside down, and it's also the wrong date, so just ignore that. Anyway, we're finally on our way, straight into a Cusco traffic jam. Time to fill up again. It's here that I realised I'd forgotten to switch on my GPS, and I love GPS because I'm a GPS nerd. I love being able to map my routes before and after and look at all the GPS analysis of how many kilometres and how much altitude I'd covered, and it's my plan to log every single long trip I do on this motorbike, just for posterity and my own interest's sake. With a GPS unit you can put data like this on your videos. The first stop would be the Cristo Blanco statue on a hill overlooking Cusco called Pucamoco, which is Quechua for Red Mountain. I soon found out if I didn't tailgate Angelo, then traffic would push in like this big green bus. And look what it says on the back window. In memory of my grandparents, Ismael and Maria. You see similar messages on a lot of buses in South America. This is called Avenida de la Cultura, which means Avenue of Culture, and to prove it, there's Alliance Française on the right. Here is where our ascent begins. These conditions aren't the best for riding a bike you've never ridden before, because it's so steep, slippery, pretty dodgy. That sign says Sexy Woman and Valle Sagrado. That means we're on the right track. Now it's starting to dry out. You can see here we're starting to leave the central part of Cusco and we're in the outlying area now. Now we're really starting to climb. Being able to make animations like this is another reason I love GPS. Another Keiko sign on the right there. That looks like an Inca wall. We must be getting close to Sacsayhuaman ruins, where Cristo Blanco is. There's Cristo Blanco, straight ahead. It looks like a miniature copy of the one in Rio de Janeiro. See the police car there, keeping an eye on the tourists? From what I've read about this statue, it was erected in 1945 at the end of the Second World War by the Palestinian Arab community that was resident in Cusco as a sign of gratitude because of the friendly way they were accepted into the Cusco community. They were actually refugees that came from Tucumán in Argentina by donkey. And in those years it would have been a very long and very dangerous and uncomfortable trip. The view here is one of the best in all of Cusco. Unfortunately, it was cloudy and overcast and it was starting to rain. When the rain started, we decided to get a move on. So if you look at the colour of the earth that statue is built upon, you can see why the Incas called it Red Mountain. Looks like my bike's getting a muddy baptism of earth, rain and rocky rubble. So this road that we're following, it is built on top of another one of the four main Inca royal roads that led out in four different directions from the main plaza of Cusco. It's also one of the Seki lines that was lined with sacred sites, huacas, fortresses. The free helmet that came with my motorbike, it was pretty cheap and the ventilation inside wasn't very good because it was probably the cheapest one available and it fogged up on the inside. So with this rain and cold weather, visibility was pretty low, and that can be dangerous when you've got things like livestock like this cow here right beside the road. Oh no, they've got vandals here too. Look at that graffiti on the side of that new house there. That's Pucapacara on the right, another fortress or control point on this main road coming into Cusco. And on the left, Tambo Machai. That's a Waka sacred site dedicated to water, and there's a lot of fountains there. Hello, policeman. Goodbye, policeman. So here we are coming up to another lookout. I wonder if the police chose that as a checkpoint, because you can see here the road sort of goes over a pass down the other side of a dividing range. Looks like rain. I think we'd better get a move on. You see that dirt build up on the road. It can be really dangerous. It's like skidding on marbles, especially around corners. And you never know what's around the corner. This town is known for its ceramics and pottery. That white sign on the left is for Ollanta, the one who beat Keiko Fujimori and who is the current president of Peru. Some of these adobe buildings look abandoned. On the left is an animal shelter called Cochahuasi that specialises in raising orphaned condors. Hey, look up there on the right, the quaint little church. I'm already starting to understand what Sean Galanos said to me when he meant you're better off on a bike than on a bus. Because if I'd been on my own, I would have ridden up there and taken a photo or two. These little hamlets look pretty quaint too, and we're only about 14 miles from Cusco. Eucalypts thrive here, and we're over 1,200 metres higher than the highest mountain in Australia. Looks like they harvest them as well. Woohoo! Feels like we're going through a Monte Carlo Grand Prix chicane. But we're not going that fast. That green sign on the left says geological fault ahead. I wonder how bad it is. Now, where is this geological fault? Where is it? Well, it was pretty bad. Looks like the whole road fell away. Weather looks to be improving as we descend into the valley. Wow, look at that! Snow-white clouds and steep green mountains. Hey, Angelo's disappeared.
Where's my guide gone? I've lost him. Sometimes it feels like a geological field trip. Is that a black coal seam exposed on the cutting on the right there? Where did he go? Ah, there he is.
These two young girls were selling trinkets to tourists at the lookout. I didn't buy a trinket, but I said, if I give you a sticker, will you let me take your photo? And they said yes, but you can see by the tall one's expression, she wasn't too happy about getting her photo taken. I had time to take a really quick panorama and look at that spectacular view. That's the town of Pisac. The plan is to ride down there and to have lunch in that town. We're going to have to cross that bridge there over the Rio Vilcanolta, also known as the Urubamba River. It has several names. It changes as it comes down the mountain range. Eventually it ends up in the Amazon and goes out the Atlantic.
The sun has come out. Inti, the Inca sun god, is smiling upon us. I hope Angelo doesn't take off and lose me again when we get into town. I just noticed he doesn't have rear vision mirrors on his handlebars on his bike, so how does he know how far behind I am? I don't know. He must have to look over his shoulder. We're descending so fast my ears are popping. Well, I have to admit, now that the sun's come out, it's much more enjoyable riding along. And this is the first time ever on my brand new purchase, my brand new motorbike, and it's only the fourth time I've ridden a motorbike in 30 years, so I'm really enjoying it. And Atwakey, my little bike, she seems to be performing quite well up until now. Touch wood. Ah, my first real hairpin bend. That sign on the right there says danger, prohibited to pass, bridge has collapsed. I think this is a temporary one-lane bridge. I remember reading a while back that the two-lane one collapsed a few months ago. Welcome to Pisac. Now we're looking for a restaurant. Looks like we got to do a U-turn. I think he's asking where we can park the bikes. Another U-turn. You see here where it says menu. Menu in Spanish is the opposite of what it is in English. Menu is the set meal of the day, and what we call the menu is la carta, and they are the more expensive meals. This was our typically Peruvian lunch. Bike starts first time now. I don't know if it's more air pressure or it's warmer or what, but it's starting very easily. Angelo's got more confidence than me pulling out in front of that bus. Pisac's a colourful little town. Heading out of town now. That's his dangerous curve. This looks like the posh part of Pisac. Pisac Heights, look at all the nice new adobe buildings. What a beautiful sunny day this has turned out to be. It smells clean here, it's got that country smell to it. Oh hello, we're pulling over here. Angelo pointed out there's many Inca ruins up on the top of the hills here. More eucalyptus. What would they do without all this eucalyptus? You see those shovels painted on the wall there? They're election symbols for a party or a candidate, because many people here are illiterate or semi-literate, or they don't speak Spanish, they speak Aymara, Quechua, so that helps them decide which party or candidate to vote for by the symbol. They're going to vote for the shovel party. It's when democracy meets illiteracy or semi-literacy. Speaking of shovels, you see some of the people in this work group are women holding picks or shovels. See, someone's painted on the rock here, Quaresma, and that's for Chato Quaresma. Shorty Quaresma is a local politician, and his symbol was a broom for sweeping away all the gutter politics and corruption. But someone there's painted over a dollar sign, changed the broom symbol to something else. You can see we're definitely in a valley now, and it's the sacred valley of the Incas, or Valle Sagrada as they call it in Spanish. But its original name was Yucay, which is a Quechua word which means trickery, seduction, or enchantment. And many of the Inca rulers had estates down here because it's quite a bit warmer, greener, less harsh than the highlands up in Cusco. It's been a lovely little place where anything grows, a bit warmer than Cusco. People have been escaping here from Cusco for centuries. Even though Pisac has a bit of a reputation these days as a hippie capital, it's still got a rural base. Look at this family of people walking along the road. You see, there's an Inca Cola truck. Inca Cola was invented in Peru in the 1930s. To me, it tastes just like pure sugar, but it's yellow, it's sweet. Peruvians love it. Peru is one of the only countries in the world where Coca-Cola is not the best-selling soft drink. Here, it's Inca Cola in every little corner shop. They even have a diet version. That mural looks very similar to one in Cusco in the main street, Avenida El Sol. I bet it was the same artist. Now there's been a landslide or something here. Look at all these rocks on the road. You see the exposed rock faces here, they look almost pink in colour. It's what gives the soil that pinkish look. And in the rainy season there's a river here actually called the Pink River. When all the mud gets in it, it looks very pink. That river there is the Urubamba, or when I first came here as a young backpacker, we used to call it the Urubamba River. And from here it flows north, then turns east, ends up in the Amazon River and empties into the Atlantic Ocean. Even though we're only like 300 kilometres or something from the Pacific, we're on the wrong side of the Andes Range. Many foreigners have died in that river because in some parts there's cascades and rapids, people go whitewater rafting, and there's many accidents. Back in the 1930s, a famous geologist called John Gregory, he drowned in some rapids about 100 miles north of here, the Magantoni Rapids. He was famous for developing glacial geology theory. He'd been in Tibet, Africa, Australia, you know, you name it, the Arctic, but this river claimed his life when his kayak capsized. Those adobe houses look like gingerbread houses, and those mountains look surreal. The colours around here, once the sun comes out, they're just absolutely vivid. It pays to be vigilant when you go around these blind corners. You never know what might come at you. It's so mountainous here, you might think you're in the Rockies or the Scottish Highlands, except Scotland wouldn't have the hot tropical sun beating down on you and aloe plants like that one on the right everywhere. Whoa, Angelo's gone off the track a bit, must have took his eyes off the road. I think that's the sanctuary up ahead. Yes, it is. The view from up here was absolutely astounding. Just look at that valley and listen to the bird calls. Angelo had mentioned that you can get your bike blessed here, and he wanted to get his blessed. But we had arrived too late. The priest only blesses immediately after midday mass, and it was well after midday when we arrived. So we just had a bit of a nosy around and planned to come back another day. This image, you see a lot of postcards for sale in Cusco. Now I know why. I had my tripod with me and I wasn't going to let an opportunity like this go by. So I shot a few panoramas. That clock even says Señor de Huanca. One thing that really intrigued me was that set of white buildings on a ridge overlooking the main river and road. It's quite large. I wonder if it's a hotel of some sort. So now back to Cusco. 2 days later, me and Angelo were going to go back to the Señor de la Huanca, this time in an anti-clockwise direction. It was nice and sunny, but the traffic was just as bad. Just as we went under this bridge, we came upon a long line of buses with blue and white balloons. I never found out why. There's a building boom going on here in Cusco. There's the coat hanger bridge again. There's the condor again. That graffiti says, "Long live the students' struggle." We took a dirt road diversion after I said to Angelo I wanted to try a bit of off-roading. The route we took looked like a construction site. Lots of piles of rocks. Check out that handmade ladder. That strange looking plant on the left, I've seen them in Australia, but I think they're native to the Americas because I've seen a lot more of them over here. Ah, back on the asphalt. Up on that hill you can see where they've bulldozed a lot of road rubble and it's cascaded down the hill. Looks fresh. Or maybe it's where the road actually gave away in a landslide. I really wanted to max out the throttle here, but I'm still running the engine in, so we never went over 80 kilometres an hour. You see, that political party has a soccer ball as its symbol, and the acronym APU spells Apu, which is also the Quechua word for mountain god. There's the Urubamba River again, and it's quite full because it's the rainy season. I'm finally starting to relax and enjoy riding. These sweeping curves, they're great. Hi there! Some sort of construction going on here. This is where we leave the valley and begin the ascent to the sanctuary. This lady wanted to sell us flowers and trinkets, but Angelo bought some candles. It pays to keep an eye out for cows going up this hill. Here we are, but approaching from the opposite direction of 2 days ago. Okay, today seems to have a tangible party atmosphere to it compared to when we were here before. Now these balloons, I guess they indicate that these vehicles are in the lineup for the blessing. Check out that lady's ponytails. Looks like people arrive here by any means possible.
Buenas, ahora nos encontramos en el santuario del Señor de Huanca. Vamos a hacer bendecir las motos. Ahí, Glenn. Ahí están las motos. Y vamos a esperar la misa 1 hora. Estas son las velitas para pedir nuestros deseos. 3 para Glenn, 4 para Glenn y 1 para mí. ¿Okay? Vamos. Cada velita es un deseo, lo que tú quieras, ¿no? Tu bien para tu moto, para tu viaje. ¿Cuántas velitas tienes? ¿Cuántos deseos tienes? Yo quiero 1. ¿Tú cuántos deseos tienes? 2. ¿2?
I must mention that although my mother was a Catholic, I was raised in a Protestant household, and all this stuff with candles and stuff, it's a bit foreign to me. But I thought, it can't do any harm, so why not?
¿Vela? Sí. El paquetito está 2 soles y...
Look at that golden altar. Miracles have been attributed to that painting in the middle there. After donating a small amount of money, the priest came out. The priest used a rose, dipped in a bucket of holy water, sprinkled a few drops, said a prayer, and there we are. Both bikes blessed. Then we rode back to Cusco via my friend Kevin's house, but I'll save that for the next episode.
Gringo Loco asks,
hit the subscribe button.
Please subscribe